Well, good evening, everyone. The meeting for the City of Vacaville Planning Commission for February 16th, 2021 is hereby called to order. As is standard, before we begin the meeting, there's a script that I read through in order to make sure that we maximize everyone's ability to participate. And we appreciate those who are participating in the teleconference meeting tonight. We're conducting the meeting pursuant to the Governor's Executive Order N2920. I ask you to bear with us as we attempt to use the remote tools properly. And if we need to make sure we take extra time to give everyone a chance to participate, we'll take that time. The Planning Commission meeting can be viewed live on the city's website, which is cityofvacaville.com, or on cable channel 26. Instructions to participate from a computer are provided on the city's webpage, and you can connect via the link that's shown on the agenda. If you're following along on the telephone and you're prompted for a participant ID, press the pound sign to be connected to the meeting. If you want to participate, please make sure you follow along on the telephone or your computer. Don't do so on channel 26 because there's a broadcast delay and you might miss your chance to participate. Callers who wish to comment can raise their hand by pressing *9. Depending upon the individual setting, you may need to press *6 after you are unmuted by the host in order to open your own microphone. And computer users requesting to speak can click on the raise hand button within their Zoom control. That concludes the script, and I will ask the secretary to call the roll.
Good evening, Planning Commissioners. Chair McCauley.
Present.
Vice Chair Fortney.
Here.
Commissioner Aldridge.
Here.
Commissioner Beaumont.
Here.
Commissioner Alan Johnson.
Here.
Commissioner Brett Johnson.
Here.
Commissioner Lightfoot.
Here.
Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. If you would all please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Mr. Bideri, Communications.
Thank you. Yes, we do have two communications. One is a letter received from residents of the Golf Course Estates neighborhood in the Leisure Town area with comments on the park master plan. The second item is a letter received from the applicants for the Green Tree project in the Leisure Town area, also with comments on the draft park master plan. And I believe both of those communications have been forwarded to the Planning Commission.
Thank you, Mr. Bideri. The next item is the approval of the agenda, and I wish to note for the commissioners and anyone else who's attending that the agenda as proposed includes on item 7A to continue that hearing until March 16th, 2021. So if we approve the agenda as proposed, there will be no further discussion of item 7A, which is the Peabody Road Department. And just after that clarification, I will ask, are there any proposed amendments to the agenda? Any commissioners wish to propose an amendment? Seeing no hands, I'll ask for a motion on the agenda.
Commissioner
Beaumont will move as amended.
I have a motion from Commissioner Beaumont and sounds like a second for Commissioner Aldridge. Secretary, please call the roll.
Commissioners Aldridge.
Yes.
Beaumont.
Yes.
Alan Johnson.
Aye.
Brett Johnson.
Yes.
Commissioner Lightfoot.
Aye.
Vice Chair Fortney.
Yeah.
Chair McCauley.
Yes. So for any of our attendees who are here looking for the Peabody Road Apartments, we will not be further discussing that item tonight. Item number 5 is business from the floor. And this is an opportunity to address the Commission with issues that are not on tonight's agenda, but are within the Commission's subject matter jurisdiction. And we limit to 3 minutes maximum per speaker or group of spokespersons, and that's per the state government code and the municipal code. So I'm going over to look at our attendees list. I'm asking if anyone wishes to address us with business from the floor. Now is the time to do so. Please raise your hand. Madam Secretary, is there anybody who you see raising their hand for business from the floor?
I do not see any hands.
And I do not either, so I will close business from the floor. Move on to item number 6, which is the consent calendar. The only item on the consent calendar is the Planning Commission minutes from our meeting of January 19th, 2021. Are there any commissioners with corrections to the minutes? Seeing none, I will ask for a commissioner to move approval of the consent calendar.
Move approval.
Commissioner Alan Johnson has the motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Commissioner Aldrich with the second. Would the secretary call the roll?
Commissioners Aldrich,
Yes.
Beaumont,
Yes.
Alan Johnson,
Aye.
Brett Johnson,
Yes.
Commissioner Lightfoot,
Aye.
Vice Chair Fortney,
Yes.
Chair McCauley.
Yes. The consent calendar is approved as proposed. We'll now move past item 7, which was continued, to item number 8, which is the business items. Number 8A is the Parks Master Plan. Ms. Baderi, who is making the presentation? Whoever it is, you can roll right in.
Okay, this item is the draft Park Master Plan update. The presentation tonight will be made by the city's consultant team from the firm of MIG. The presenters will be Lauren Schmidt and Ellie Fiore. Before they begin, I'll just mention that, again, this is the draft of the city's updated Park Master Plan. An update to the Park Master Plan is one of the actions in the general plan. So when the general plan was adopted, one of the follow-up implementation steps was for the city staff to prepare a new Park and Recreation Master Plan. The Planning Commission, of course, is an important party in implementing the city's park plans. You approve plans and recommend approval of plans that involve the construction of new parks, especially in new development areas. You review the general plan and any amendments to it, and that may affect the Park and Recreation Master Plan and the implementation of goals related to those. You look at the consistency of proposed capital improvement projects on an annual basis for consistency with the general plan to ensure that we're properly implementing the general plan. And you advise the City Council on an annual report on our status in implementing the general plan. So this report is an opportunity for the consultant team and the city staff to present to you the draft of the Park Master Plan update and to provide any comments to the team on items that you would like to see addressed or further addressed in the draft. I should also mention that Parks and Recreation Director Carrie Walker is in the meeting this evening, as well as Park Planner Hugh Hesterman. So Lauren and Ellie, I'll turn this over to you and ask you to present to the commission.
Okay, great. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, excellent. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. Yeah, so thank you for that introduction. I understand we have about 30 minutes or less to present, so I'm going to go pretty quickly, then we'll pause for comments and questions, and then I'll turn it over to my colleague Lauren, who will get into some of the more detail with you. But we're going to start with kind of a high-level overview of the draft Parks and Rec Master Plan, which we call the PRMP. Next slide, please. And as you just explained very clearly, Fred, this is an implementation action of the general plan that you all adopted in 2015. It builds off the previous park master plan, as well as the really thorough recreation needs assessment that the city invested in 2013, which involved a lot of analysis of the system as well as community involvement. So we really use both of those as the launching points for this work. And again, the intent is to take a big look at what's going on in the city, the system today, how things are going, where there's gaps and needs, and then provide a structure and framework for you all to make those decisions, as Fred just described. Next slide. It's important to recognize that there are several other efforts going on in parallel that we coordinated with. We did an analysis of 3 of the larger recreation facilities to see what the viable alternatives would be for renovating or replacing those. We've developed a park master plan for Centennial Park, which will be following shortly on the heels of this PRMP. The city also commissioned a sports center feasibility study and a development impact fee study during the same timeframe we were working in. Next slide. This is just a quick kind of snapshot of the planning process. And you can see we did several touch points of community engagement since we began in the fall of 2017. We're slowed down a little bit last year by COVID, but like everything, but we've adapted and picked our engagement right back up online last fall and winter. And I've been working very closely with the Parks and Recreation staff for the last several months. Next slide. So this is just a quick orientation to the document itself, which you all have access to. And then the appendices have the more detailed information on existing conditions and our engagement findings. Next slide. Okay, next slide. So as I mentioned, our first step was to really take an assessment of the system today. So this is our base map with existing parks as well as open spaces. And then we overlaid, you'll see the new district numbers in there as well, the new council districts that'll be put in place this year. Next slide. In addition to those physical assets that you all have, the parks, the open spaces, the trails, you have a really great variety of recreational programs that I'm sure you all know. And that was something that the Vacaville community really highly values and takes advantage of. That was a clear output of our community engagement. Next. As I said, we were all obviously impacted by COVID-19 last year, and the Parks and Recreation staff did a great job kind of pivoting and adapting and, making sure that things were safe and accessible and as open as possible. Nobody knows yet what the fiscal impacts will be of the COVID-19 on the city or other revenues. And we don't actually think that the pandemic changes any of our major recommendations. It may impact the timing of some of those implementation items, but the core recommendations are still valid and important. Next slide. Okay. I'll quickly run through what we heard from the community engagement, starting again back in 2017. Next slide. We started with some very high level engagement activities where we quote unquote popped up at different community events and in parks throughout the city and asked people kind of what their high level vision was for the Parks and Recreation system, what they wanted to see more of, and that really kind of set the stage for some further analysis. Next slide. We then had a online survey, which was map-based. We had excellent turnout to this. I think we had over 1,000 residents reply. The next slide. And this was a way for us to drill down into how people are using the existing system. What you see here is the distribution of respondents. So they were really, covered the city very, very evenly, which is a great outcome. And so what we asked people here were kind of, what's your favorite park? How do you use it? How do you get there? Do you experience any barriers getting there? And then people were able to leave comments that were then, geotagged to that specific park or park entrance or trail, et cetera. Next slide. Again, our mission was to kind of verify or modify the findings of the 2013 Rec Needs Assessment. And what we found was that those needs were very consistent and were still top priorities for the community. I won't read these here, but you can see some of the items that rose to the top, both in 2013 and in our 2017-18 engagement. Next slide. So then we turned to asking people for their priorities, given limited resources and time, what are the community priorities with, and kind of asking people to make trade-offs, if you will. And so these are the top priorities that resulted from that exercise. So, a lot of improving parks that exist, particularly amenities that add comfort, trails, or a high priority across the city. And then improving Lagoon Valley Park was a priority for many. Next slide. Then we did a needs assessment, again, starting with the inventory of what's on the ground now, as well as, again, sort of the indication of how folks were using the parks, how they felt about the facilities and the recreation programs. Next slide, please. And this was based on the work that you all did for the 2015 general plan, where you developed park categorization, descriptions, service area, which is, how far should each of these things be from residents' homes ideally? And then what is the level of service goal, which is just kind of a rough indicator of how the acreage is keeping up with growth. And so these are standards that are used fairly regularly in the Parks and Recreation planning world. Next slide. So then we mapped these items. So what you're looking at here is that service area for your neighborhood parks in green. So this is a 10-minute walk, taking into account the road network and other some barriers that may be between households and parks. So if you live right next to a park, but the freeway is between you and that park, you probably can't get there in a 10-minute walk. So this analysis takes that sort of thing into account. Next slide. And then we layered in the residential areas so we could see, how do these compare to where people live. And next slide. And then we added some of the planned parts. You can see that it really improves the coverage, the geographical coverage of most neighborhoods in Vacaville. Next slide. So then we did the same for the community parks, which are the larger parks. And you can see, again, most of the city covered here with that slightly larger service area. Next slide. Same thing, some residential areas kind of on the fringes, on the edges of the city that could use better service. Next slide. But again, those will be covered by some more planned parks. So overall, next slide, please. What we found is very good park coverage from a geographic standpoint and from a walking access standpoint. And again, as Vacaville continues to grow, as you mentioned, parks and recreation open space planning will be part of those growth plans. So basically, you're starting from a really, a good place of having your parks well distributed throughout the city and accessible to most households, with some areas, to be mindful of as the city continues to grow. And I know some of the planned parks that have come online or their plans have been advanced since we started this exercise will cover some of these neighborhoods as well. Next slide. And then this is sort of a summary of what people told us their community, what the community told us their needs and desires were for the parks and recreation system. So access to nature, be it trails, nature and parks, nature education, incredibly important to people. Would love to see, that trail network grow both in and around the city. As I mentioned earlier, comfort and convenience in the parks, more programs, more experiences in the parks, and some programs that create interesting novel activity. Adventure programming, rock climbing walls, that sort of thing are very popular right now, but there is some interest expressed in those. Next slide. So I will pause there before I turn it over to Lauren. Are there any questions or comments?
Commissioners, I don't see any hands up. Any questions or comments right now? I don't see anybody raising their hand right now. I know we'll give the public a chance to participate in a bit, but right now, looks like you can continue. Go ahead.
Commissioner Lightfoot has his hand raised.
Just saw that. Commissioner Lightfoot, go ahead.
Thanks. I thought I'd just touch on it because we went over this section, but as a park classification system, I was curious, was there a discussion about making Lagoon Valley Park its own classification or its own designation? And because it's so unique, and even expanding or adding another regional park might not actually be the same?
Yes, it is in a class of its own. Thank you for reminding me that. That wasn't totally evident from the maps I just showed, but Lagoon Valley is the one regional park that you all have existing in your city now. And regional parks are those that serve a larger area within and in adjacent cities.
So in the designated, there's some designated areas that we're targeting new parks or new land, would any of those larger acreage that we're targeting fall under the regional classification?
They would, those, the sort of service analysis we did with the walkability, we don't typically apply to regional parks because those are facilities that, because they draw from a broader area, people tend to drive to those. So it would certainly provide close to home recreation opportunities for a lot of the nearby residents. But it is treated somewhat differently because it's more of a regional level attraction.
So do you think adding additional regional parks be different from Lagoon Valley Park? Do you think that it'd be a different classification altogether for Lagoon Valley?
Well, yeah, go ahead, Lauren.
Yeah, you know, the way we've been handling it is you have one regional park, which is Lagoon Valley Park, but you have your entire accessible open space network, which, you know, in some communities, those would be considered regional parks, but they are considered accessible open space in your community. So I'm not sure we're answering your question, but at this moment, the plan doesn't assume another park of the scale of Lagoon Valley Park. As we get into the recommendations in the next presentation or in the next sections of the presentation, we can talk about what some of those things are. But it does look at your larger network of public space, including accessible open space network and Centennial Park, which is kind of special and larger than a typical community park.
I gotcha. So maybe when we get closer down to the end of the presentation, I'll be able to explain what I'm thinking a little further.
Sure, that sounds good.
And we can certainly come back to you. So raise your hand when you're ready again. Any other commissioners wish to comment at this point? If not, consultant, you may proceed.
All right, so this is Lauren Schmidt, and thank you to Ellie for kind of setting up how we got to, you know, what is essentially the meat of the plan. And if you can go on to the next slide, the third chapter of the plan document presents the vision and goals for the plan. And so this really builds on what we heard from the community, what your vision in the general plan is, and expresses the future for the parks and recreation system. So that's a narrative statement, and then it's supported, next slide please, by a set of 7 goals that address different aspects of the system. And so you can see them up on the screen. These become an important organizing structure for the next chapter of the plan, where there's associated recommendations with each of these goals that address play, ecosystems, the connected network, and so on and so forth. So moving on to the next slide. Yes.
Lauren, this is Chair McCauley. Going back to that list of the 7 items here, are those supposed to be in some sort of priority, or why did we get that 1 through 7 listed in that order?
Sure, they are not a priority order, but they kind of step through. The first and second and third are really about the physical system. The fourth and fifth get more into programming and activity in the parks. The sixth is overall service provision, and the 7th is about how you pay for it. And so, you know, you don't need to have recreation programs unless you have a place to do it. And the reason they're numbered is because, you know, they could be lettered, they could be captured, you know, with a different identification system, but the 4th chapter of the plan keys each of the recommendations. So there's 1A, 1B, 1C, so that you can track that and make reference to it in the future when you're, you know, trying to assess projects and initiatives for plan compliance.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, next slide, please. So the fourth chapter of the plan is really where we get into more of the policy recommendations. And next slide. These are organized, as I mentioned, by goal. And this next series of slides, you have the plan document at your disposal to look at kind of the gory detail. But, a few highlights from each. Goal 1 really talks about that physical park system, the system of play. It emphasizes that 10-minute walk park access for all residents. One of the things that came out of the public involvement was, people appreciate that there are parks, but the level of amenity isn't the same across the city. And so there's some focus in this chapter about how to add some of those high value enhancements, restrooms, shade, seating, to make it more pleasant to spend the day in the park. This goal also has recommendations around multifunctional spaces, converting single-use facilities to support additional activities. And a good example of something like that is where you've gone in and striped tennis courts to also support pickleball. And there's a lot of places like that where you could have multiple field configurations that can be used for different age groups, that kind of thing. So getting the most out of your existing facilities. There's directions under this first goal as well about expanding recreation facilities, so the fields, the courts, pool space, a new recreation center. And these are things, some of these things are addressed in your fees, and some of these are just components of a park. There's also an emphasis on improving universal access, so even going beyond ADA to make parks more inclusive. The second goal, onto the next slide, please. This talks about natural systems. As Ellie pointed out, this was something that the community really emphasized, that they value getting those connections through the park system. And so there are recommendations about protecting and preserving open space in natural areas, connecting wildlife, habitat corridors, looking at different types of play environments, so incorporating natural play, not just play structures that you see found in many of your parks. There's also recommendations around adding environmental education and nature programming, conserving and recharging waters within the park system. So this goal has the recommendations that really highlight the connection of people to nature in your park system. Next slide, goal 3. This goal is about that interconnectivity, and this is one where there's some crossover with your transportation and bike and ped network plans. Came out very strongly. I think you could see from the public engagement that people really appreciate the opportunity to walk and bike in the park system, both within the parks and to get to them. And so this looks at creating safe routes to parks so that 10-minute walk, really is a safe thing for everybody from, the tiniest kid to the oldest adult, to have that be an option. Talks about the importance of collaborating with public works about expanding that walking and biking network.
And Lauren, I'm going to have you hold on for a sec. Commissioner Lightfoot has his hand up again. I'll also note that one of our public attendees has their hand up. The public will get an opportunity, but not yet. Commissioner Lightfoot, go ahead.
Hi, I was curious on the safe routes to parks, and if what are some of the design things that you're thinking for safe routes to parks? What does that encompass?
Sidewalks, bike lanes, curb cuts that go into the pedestrian network within a park.
So we have a pretty extensive bike trail system already that
You do.
is pretty secluded in areas and maybe not well lit. Is there any design implications or anything standards that are being thought of about that?
There are bike and pedestrian network expansion projects. The safe routes to parks also, you do have a wonderful set of off-street trails that people really value. This is also about how you walk from your house, maybe on the street network, how you get across a street, with a safe crosswalk. So it includes both of those. And so those walkshed maps that Ellie showed, help identify that. That really granular, do you make the curb cut here or there? That's kind of beyond the scope of a long range plan like this. This plan's goal is to highlight that that's a need and to identify a project type to take care of it, but not so much to say along these hundreds of miles of street, here are the crosswalks, or that kind of thing. So so hopefully that answers your question.
Commissioner Lightfoot's turned off his mic, so if you put your hand down, and we can come back to you later as needed. Lauren, go ahead with your presentation.
Okay. Final one I want to highlight under goal 3 is the value of your accessible open space network. It's a really unique feature for Vacaville. It provides that connection to, the natural world and to the landscape beyond Vacaville. And there is a lot of interest in having more trails and trailhead access that allow people to get in and use that network. So there are some recommendations and also project types around that. Goal 4, next slide, please. This one talks about identity and some of the things that as a city you do to attract people to town. And so things like a citywide signage and wayfinding program so that not only your residents but also visitors can make use of that wonderful bike system that you have and can get around and go to some of your features like Lagoon Valley and Centennial Park. Public art is addressed here, seeing the parks and trails and facilities as a place where you can really showcase your commitment to public art. Special events like Creek Walk, the concert series, which will resume again and be just as popular as it has been, attracting people to downtown. Also, there was some connection to the recently completed downtown plan with the idea of focusing programming and activation in and around downtown so that that becomes a hub for people and they spend money downtown. This also talks about interpreting local history in parks and facilities and really making them showcase Vacaville's identity. Next one, please. Goal 5 focuses on the recreation programming, talks about adding more culturally diverse programming, increased intergenerational programming. There's a great range of programming already available in Vacaville. You have some unique offerings and a very strong therapeutic recreation programming. And so this is about building on and continuing what the city is already very strong in, and then adding some new twists to that. So mobile recreation and pop-up play, and the recommendations under this goal talk about using pilot programs to test out new ideas. And two types of programming where there have been capacity issues in the past are addressed in this section: increasing capacity for sports programs. And that's really tied to the first goal, because facilities and how become kind of a pinch point there. And it's the same with aquatics. So the pool is maxed out, but there's a huge waiting list for those programs. So this talks about expanding both aquatics and sports programs. Next slide, please. So goal 6, this is about operations, maintenance, staffing, customer service, data management, and tracking. So it's kind of the housekeeping side of things. And there's a number of recommendations that touch on all of these. Moving on to goal 7. So goal 7 talks about funding, and it addresses capital improvement funding and operations and maintenance funding, because those come from different places typically. So looking at allocating Measure M funds, market-based business plans for any major capital projects, how earned income is allocated, recommends modifying existing assessment districts to simplify administration, and also exploring new sources of operations funding. So the 4th chapter of the plan has a lot of the kind of policy recommendation meat. Moving on to the 5th chapter. This is a component we heard about a lot as we were looking at the past work, that there really hadn't been a look at what kind of features should go in each type of park. So this 5th chapter provides some guidance there. And so moving on to the next slide. For each of the park classifications that you have, the structure is similar. It talks about the intent, the function and the role of the park type, talks about site selection and access criteria, so size, the transportation access, orientation, such as, not locating a neighborhood park behind a bunch of houses, for example. Minimum park features, so kind of the baseline minimum, and then additional park features. So that provides a menu of elements that fit in with that park classification that can be added to that baseline minimum. And in some cases, if there's an incompatible type of park feature, that's spelled out as kind of something to be avoided.
And Lauren,
and so an example,
Lauren, at this point, I'm going to ask for staff to step in a little bit, because we have a couple of pieces of correspondence, specifically in the Green Tree Senior area, go to the question of minimum and incompatible park features. For example, whether playgrounds are appropriate in a senior area. And this seems like it's a good place to address that, and whether the plan already accommodates their concerns or if there's any changes that are needed. So whether it's you or Fred or Carrie, I'd like to see this addressed now.
Sure. Well, I thank you to Fred and to Carrie. They had actually forwarded that on to us. And, the way these are structured, I think all of the things that they would like fit in. The one thing that, as a minimum park feature, having a playground, that's kind of a building block of every park in Vacaville. And so, I can see you may want to downplay in that area of town, not make that be your biggest playground. But in terms of the minimum, and the next slide, I believe, talks about neighborhood parks, so it might be good to turn to that one. The minimum features are a pretty basic set. So a playground or play environment, and that can be defined, could be a sandbox, it could be a nature play environment, it could be something very small, a lawn area, shade trees, a picnic area, site furnishings, water fountain, looped walking path, and then signage. The additional features, all of the things that the letter suggested, totally fit into things that fit into a neighborhood park. So those additional features, what they're looking for, it seems spot on with what the guidelines call out by the read that I took of the letter.
Okay, thank you. And we'll see if other commissioners have questions or comments later on, but go ahead with the presentation.
Okay, so next slide, please. So the 6th chapter is projects and prioritization. So moving on to the next. So the capital project list has, it's organized by neighborhood, community, and regional parks. So the more developed park, there is every single existing park is addressed on the capital project list, and planned parks are as well. Accessible open space is also addressed, and there's a trail project and trailhead development project that creates a program of investment over 10 years. And then special purpose facilities, which Vacaville has a nice inventory of. There have been a number of special studies for the different special purpose facilities. Ellie mentioned that earlier. So, looking at different options for a sports complex, looking at different options for certain renovations to, let's say, Three Oaks. And so because there's still options under consideration, there's a cost range from the lowest cost option to the highest cost option. And so those ongoing special studies are addressed and synced up with the special purpose facility recommendations.
Lauren, Commissioner Beaumont has his hand raised, so I'm going to ask you to stop and let Commissioner Beaumont comment. Go ahead, Doug.
Thank you, Lauren. This is Commissioner Beaumont. Under the planned parks or existing parks, I just have a general question. Is the Play for All Park on Elmira and Leisure Town, does the city have any responsibility for that?
Yeah, that's on the project list. It's called out actually on 2 lines under community parks, Play for All Park, and then the expansion, the Elmira expansion.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, next slide. So another thing that this chapter talks about are what we termed it implementation readiness, because there are we see 3 types of projects in Vacaville. There are the reinvestment and enhancement projects for the parks that you own or, are in the process of developing. There are other projects that are development driven. And so the timing of those is, not necessarily fully in the city's control. It depends on the development activity. And then there's a negotiation about bringing on new parks and facilities and trail improvements. And then the third category are these aspirational projects, these major facilities like the sports complex or a new recreation center at Centennial Park, renovating Three Oaks. And so these are things that are beyond, your capacity to fund right now, but they are important projects for the community and funding is needed. So they're in the plan, but they are highlighted as aspirational because they're not something that you're going to be able to, kick off next year because you need to identify funding first. That'll be the first step in implementing them. Next slide, please. So it's a long range plan with some, visionary projects in it. And so when you look at the different categories of projects, there's neighborhood parks and a number of improvements. You have a lot of neighborhood parks. Your community parks, those are larger, and there are, some that have, like Centennial, some phases that are pretty significant to go. Looking at reinvesting across Lagoon Valley Park, people love it. They love the landscape there and, the paths, the picnic shelters, the playground. Just a big place that will need investment over time. Accessible open space projects and access points. And then that range of special purpose facilities, depending on, some of the directions that you go with some of the options that are on the table for some of those facilities. There's a range of costs. Moving on to the next slide. One of the pieces of the plan is this rolling 5-year action plan, the active projects that the department will be moving forward. And there are 6 criteria, and they're up here on the screen. But that is how each year this 5-year action plan will get updated to keep forward progress on all of the things that are within this plan. Next slide, please. And so this one and the one that follows, and you can scroll through that one as well, are what's in the draft before you. And, there'll be some tweaks to this, based on feedback that we've been getting. But this is the way that plan, the action plan would be structured and then updated each year. Next one, please. So I think all of you know that at the beginning of the month, the Parks and Rec Commission hosted a public workshop on Saturday morning. And in your packet, I believe you got a memo summarizing the feedback we heard from commissioners and from community members who were in attendance. And so just have a couple slides to highlight what we heard, which would modify some of the elements in the draft plan that you received. So next one, please. So there are 4 overall pieces of feedback. So elevating and expanding on the discussion of diversity, equity, and inclusion throughout the PRMP. So that would include a statement in chapter 1, but also include adding a few words and tweaks into the vision to make sure that diversity, equity, and inclusion is really strongly coming through the vision, and also adding to the action plan another criterion. There was discussion and a lot of support for addressing the tribes associated with the Vacaville region and moving towards a land acknowledgement. And so in the memo that you received, there is some direction about how that would be integrated into the plan. As well as, going forward, spelling out some additional ideas about how to further conduct outreach to underrepresented communities. And several pieces of feedback around sports fields, making sure that those get maximum usability and, become even better than today. Next slide, please. There was some specific feedback for recommendations under each goal that's spelled out in the memo, such as emphasizing program affordability in Goal 5 and highlighting the importance of free and low cost options to encourage inclusivity. Next slide, please. And there was some feedback that was project specific. So there were a couple little tweaks to the park development guidelines, nothing that was, substantive. Some public works feedback about the capital project list and some tweaks to the 5-year action plan. And so making sure that the recently approved parks master plans were in there, adding a new sports field enhancement project, and adding Green Tree Park as well. And so that concludes our presentation this evening.
Thank you very much. I'm going to open things up to members of the commission before the public, and I see Commissioner Alan Johnson, then Commissioner Aldrich, then Commissioner Lightfoot. Commissioner Alan Johnson, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I have a couple things. First of all, I want to thank you and staff for the immense amount of work that was put into this. It's a substantial package that I went over, so thank you for all the work. Also, I just wanted to comment on the public outreach was very well in this project. There's a lot of public outreach, and I was happy to see that. Couple comments and questions I have. You just previously mentioned the commissioner comments that are outlined on page 14. Unfortunately, I can't read those because of my eyes. And the graphs that start on page 106, the text is so small that I actually truthfully couldn't read them with my eyes. So maybe that's just a comment for staff for future packages for people that are getting old like me to make the print a little bigger. Couple other things is I know that there's site-specific plans for parks like Nelson Park and Owl Patch. I think your last slide kind of referenced moving forward and including those plans, but I didn't see them specifically called out. Are they in this staff report?
Yeah, all projects that have master plans, all parks that have master plans like Owl Patch and all of that is reflected in the project list. The piece of feedback from the Park and Recreation Commissioners was just making sure that, basically if the project wasn't under construction, making sure there was some movement forward on those in the action plan. So that's one area that we'll confirm.
Okay, all right.
We'll
thank you.
confirm that. Yeah.
And then two more things that I wanted to mention. Commissioner Beaumont already brought this up. The Play for All Park is a huge deal in this community. It's, you know, in its name, Play for All. So it includes everyone, including the, you know, golf course estates letter people. It's really reaches out to everybody, and it seemed to be somewhat missing throughout the package, but I was wondering if that was because it's still under construction, or are there plans, these plans and lists that we're creating, is that considered in there, or is that kind of a different animal because of the way it's funded and developed?
You know, it's included in the project list and the way it's being developed is actually mentioned in the notes. It's a really nice model. You know, there's a lot of support in the community for inclusive play. And so, you know, when we started this process, it wasn't underway, but it's a pretty impressive effort, and so it's nice to see that is moving forward. You know, if you have places in the plan where you know you think that makes sense, it's in the project list, so. I'm not sure where else it would fit.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure that wasn't forgotten, because I think the way that came about and the way it's being developed is really interesting and beneficial to the community. I also appreciated the letter from the golf course estates leadership. I think they brought out some pretty valid points. You know, and how we allocate funding for the different areas and the end users of those areas. But then back to the Play for All Park, you know, there's a lot of things about that park specific that were for the older community members. So I just wanted to mention that. And one final thing, you know, in the community recommendations, there's a lot of support for adding bathrooms to the parks. And, you know, I just wanted to maybe mention that, you know, if we do add those type of facilities to the public areas, that we'll need to deal with the improper use of those facilities as well. So that's just my 2 cents.
Thank you, Commissioner Alan Johnson. Commissioner Aldrich is next.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I also want to address the Play for All Park, a committee which I have been representing the Planning Commission on for probably the inception. And although I can't go to all the meetings because I work evenings, I've certainly been in contact with Tom Felipe and his folks, and been to the groundbreakings and so on. And I think I didn't see it listed in any of the parks, you know, on the lists, but it's going to be spectacular. And I don't see any other parks in Vacaville that will have facilities for all children of all abilities. And I'm wondering, you know, this is just one park. Are we going to be placing some structures for children of all abilities in any of the other parks, or will it just be the Play for All Park? I think this is going to be a crown jewel in Vacaville. There are not a lot of them in this area. Tom got this from Round Rock, Texas. He got the original idea, and it's been in the works for many, many years. And I think we need to put this front and center in our park plan. I know there's an MOU for maintenance through the city for this park. So I just wanted to bring it out there and let everybody know that it is going to be a crown jewel of Vacaville. And it's, It's going to be amazing. If you haven't been able to donate to it, the brick program is still open. You may purchase a brick with your family name on it, a name of your pet, someone you'd like to remember, your children, whatever. And all these bricks will be laid throughout the facility, and you'll be forever remembered in the Play for All Park. So I want to give a shout out to Tom and everybody that has worked so hard through all these years. We are now seeing such great progress out there, and I certainly don't want it to be sheltered by some of the other parks, because I think it's going to be an incredible, well, I know it's going to be an incredible thing. So that's my suggestion. And I also want to talk about the Green Tree Park, since I live very close to that. And the girls and the people that, women that have worked on that committee so hard, I think they had some great suggestions in the letter that they wrote as far as the types of activities in a senior park. They really came up with some good ones. So I also wanted to commend them, and I look forward to using that park because I will be in walking distance of it. So those are my comments, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Aldrich, and I see you moved directly to the practical aspect of parks funding, so thank you on that. I'll note that Commissioner Alan Johnson still shows his mic is open, so Commissioner Johnson, if you're done, you might want to close that. We'll now move to Commissioner Lightfoot and then Vice Chair Fortney and Commissioner Johnson. I know I have some comments, and then we will come back to staff and consultant. And Commissioner Aldrich, your hand is still raised, but Commissioner Lightfoot, you have the floor.
Hi, thanks.
Or given the COVID world, you have the mic, not the floor.
Yes, sir. So I have a couple notes, and I'm going to start back on the park classifications, and maybe I can expand a little bit more on what I'm thinking in designating Lagoon Valley as its own classification. So if you go to table 6.1, it's on page 109. What that table shows is it shows some targeted open space areas. And I'm just curious if any of those targeted open space areas that are larger might end up being categorized as regional parks.
And staff and consultant, why don't you go ahead and, since that's a direct question, address that now.
They are intended to be part of the accessible open space network, not to be, a regional park with the type of facilities that Lagoon Valley Park has in it. That's the intent.
So is there any intent to add any regional parks under that classification?
Mayor McCauley, this is Hugh Hesterman. Might I take a stab at that, answering that question?
Go ahead, Mr. Hesterman.
Yes, thank you. Commissioner Lightfoot, maybe it would help to know that the major open space areas that the city is blessed with can accommodate many of the type of activities that occur at Lagoon Valley Park, such as hiking, biking, walking, trails, photography, all those kinds of things. But the open space category in and of itself does not allow the real heavy active uses like can happen at our existing Lagoon Valley Park. So the concept would be to open up those officially, I should say, because they are already used by the public, but to make them more user-friendly and designate trails, provide signage, trailhead, that sort of thing for better access into the open space. But they would remain categorized as open space areas, not as parks or a regional park. Does that answer your question better?
Yeah, so, what I'm really trying to nail down and figure out is, I think that our Lagoon Valley Park is just very unique. And I don't know of any other communities that have anything quite like it. And I'm thinking that it deserves its own designation or its own implementation or plan that's separate from the broader categorization. Am I,
Okay.
do you understand what I'm?
I think I do. And it does in the fact that it is our only, it is the only park we have in the regional park category. And that regional park category indicates not who operates it, but who it serves. So it actually serves our entire region. I would say 40%, due to our surveys, 40% of the people entering that park are non-residents. So we know it serves a good portion of people outside our community. But it is a spectacular facility, and we, the citizens of Vacaville are really, especially blessed to have it as part of our city. But it also could accommodate more if we did some further development and improvements within the park to accommodate greater numbers of people, I would say, and more of the festivals and activities that have become so popular out there.
Yeah, no, I really agree with that. And I have some notes on that going forward too. And I think I'll get to them in a couple here.
Okay. Just as a follow-up, of course, Lagoon Valley Park, as you probably know, will need its own park master plan, which has to this date never really been fully completed.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, so actually I'll roll right into some of my thoughts and notes on that. So in 4B, it's on page 65, they talk about communications, and I really liked the, it's bullet 4B.2, and it's bullet point 7. It's so it mentions it's created an interactive online park and trails map with accurate trails maps, photos of each park, and how to search and get distinct features of the park. I think that would be incredibly useful in the expansion of, or the use of Lagoon Valley. There are so many trails out there. I mean, that I think that the first time visitor or people coming from out of the region might not even realize. Awesome to have a map system or interactive on your phone or something like that you can pull up from signage that shows some of the trails that are probably affectionately known as like the cheese grater or the switchbacks, or just the oak tree that people visit, and calling those things out and getting other people to do hiking and biking in the area. I think that that's a great idea, and I really push to get that implemented on some signage, and it would really increase the use of those trails.
Well, Commissioner Lightfoot, you might be very pleased to know that we just completed a trail map with names assigned to every single trail in Lagoon Valley Park and the open space surrounding it. And as Eagle Scout projects, we've had, I think I'm on the 4th one now, where trail markers are being installed that correspond to the names that some of which you referenced. And that would all be available. The map would be available from, say, your smartphone or some other interactive device. We also have some of the trails have QR codes on them that will connect. If you scan it with your cell phone, it'll connect you to a video that describes a piece of history that may have happened at that location or nearby. So you're absolutely right on the money. That is what people have been asking for, and we're in the process of developing that.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, there are so many like little spots throughout that park that are really special, like the Pioneer Grave or anything like that. They'd be educational and can really expand the use of all that. You could spend, there's miles of trails, and I think that's great. Thank you. On the same side of amenities that I think are park features that are a part of Lagoon Valley Park, I'm looking specifically at page 100 now. It's just a list of park features. On Lagoon Valley Park, we also have a radio-controlled car course, multiple tracks for radio-controlled cars that people might not know about, a radio-controlled airplane landing strip, We have an archery range, a disc golf, and does mention disc golf. I want to go into there a little bit. I think that disc golf, even though I don't utilize it myself, I often get in the way of disc golfers. I think that part of the plan for Lagoon Valley, if we could mark out the disc golf course better for not only its users, but other hikers or users of the park. There's not another disc golf course within 30 or 40 miles. I think there's Napa or Concord. Something else that we have in that park that I think could be expanded for events or rehabbed a little bit to show, to improve it. I think, and it's also, I looked up reviews of it. A lot of disc golfers really enjoy it. So I think that expanding that into events and that sort would really expand on the park itself too.
Commissioner Lightfoot, do you have other comments?
I do have a couple more.
Okay, go ahead. I just heard dead air, so continue.
Understood. Thank you. Now, so switching a little bit. I'm looking at page 92 and called out the City of Vacaville Public Works standards, specifications, and drawings. It's at the bottom under regulations. And it corresponds a little bit with making an identity on each park. And I was wondering if we're going to be looking into any design standards for specific lighting or concrete stamping or something that designates, this as a Vacaville park.
Chair McCauley, would you like me to take that question again?
Go right ahead. You're doing fine.
Okay. Commissioner Lightfoot, if I might, the answer to your question is yes, there certainly could be some. There already are some. For example, we use the standard monument that has become the symbol, the Vacaville Hills, that we use at every single park to designate that each of our parks are indeed a park of Vacaville. We do have some standards that are used more or less in our parks for lighting and a few other things. But at the same time, there's also a balance that we don't want to go over in making rubber stamp parks, if you will. In other words, we want each park to have its own character and to have some place defining characteristics to it that in no way make one park look like another. Hopefully I answered your question there.
Yeah, no, I agree with you completely. I think that this is probably the time to really put into that detail of what our standards might be, or minimal standards. I think, and then have that included in this document as part of the way we go about creating a park, or what we might add to it to make it a quote unquote Vacaville park, or set it as those standards. And I think that's all of my notes.
We'll give you another opportunity to come back later if you have other comments, but thank you. Vice Chair Fortney, you're next, followed by Commissioner Brent Johnson. And Commissioner Lightfoot, if you'd close your mic and lower your hand. Vice Chair Fortney, you have control.
Yes, thank you, Chair McCauley. I need clarification on one item, and then I have a question. So the first item is I want to make sure we get clarification and an answer to the residents in Leisure Town over there in regards to the Green Tree Park, the neighborhood park, and the minimum standards. So I didn't hear, do we have flexibility in that verbiage, or is a playground or play environment a minimum, a necessity that has to be provided in a neighborhood park? Staff?
And
The way that's written-
Actually, I'd like to hear Mr. Baderi and Kerry Walker join in on this, partly because one of the questions we have on this is whether it is a document that sets guidelines that we should follow or standards that we must follow? So if you'd address those, and I'd definitely like to hear from staff on this.
Very good. This is Fred Buderi. I think I can answer a couple of points there, and then certainly Carrie, if you'd like to follow up on that, that would be great. So the Park Master Plan, it is an implementation plan. It does intend to set some minimum standards that parks would follow, but I believe the language as it's written is intended to provide for some design flexibility to implement those standards. So not the same as, for example, a zoning ordinance chapter that the commission is typically looking at, where we have very specific ordinance language that sets a requirement. In this case, I think the intent of the master plan would be to operate as design guidelines that set some minimum typologies for the different parks. And the only other thing I'd add to that is, yes, I think based on the answer we heard earlier in the evening, I think the language is intended to provide flexibility. And I think certainly Lauren can go back over that in a little more detail if I didn't catch it correctly. But the comments we did receive from both the residents in the Leisure Town area and the project designers for the Green Tree project, which will be built in that area, did seek clarification on whether the language would allow them flexibility to design a park that maybe is more focused in its facilities toward a senior population versus the more general population in the city. So that's all I'll say. Carrie, do you want to add anything to that?
Sure. Thank you, Fred. This is Director Walker. I just wanted to share with the group that the Park and Rec Master Plan, as is the case with most plans, it's a living document, particularly as it relates to projects. And so, as Fred mentioned, this is to provide guidance. One of the things that we do, that staff does when we are in the planning stages for parks, is that we engage the community and we hold public meetings and we listen to the community and to assist us then with the actual master planning of the park. And usually we will then bring back a draft master plan to share at a public meeting, a public forum again. And yeah, again, it's a living document. And I will, Lauren, I think that you had something that you wanted to share.
Yeah, Fred, I think, expressed it well. The language, this is not shall language, you know, they're called development guidelines. And so you do have the option to determine that something is not the right fit. You know, if some sort of play environment, whether it's, you know, we see the trend of actually senior playgrounds, even you see that advertised in Parks and Recreation publications. So there's a lot of flexibility, but there's you know, trying to be consistent across parks of different types with these guidelines.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, Vice Chair, you still have the floor. So do you have other questions, or did that answer what you need?
That answered that clarification. My question is in regards to the special purpose facility or sports complex. And when is the time, when is the time and how would we implement or look at doing a study on a regional level to see what those needs are for a large sports complex that not only would serve the residents of Vacaville, but would look to revenue sources for the city in regard to not only fees, but sales tax and TOT in the future? When is the ideal time to look at that?
I can jump in here. This is Director Walker.
Yeah.
I just
Okay.
want, so to share, a performance study has been conducted, and that was presented to the council in January 2020. And at that time, the intention was for the mayor to establish a committee that would be comprised of a couple of council members and a couple of park and recreation commissioners. However, it was determined that the Park and Rec Master Plan was the greater priority at the time, and that we needed to get through this and get this plan approved to establish the priorities. And then move on from there. But there is a performance study that has been conducted.
Okay. Thank you very much. It answers my question.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Brent Johnson now has the floor. And Vice Chair, if you'd lower your hand. Commissioner Brent Johnson, you have control.
Thank you, Chair McCauley. I appreciate it. I think from a community standpoint and a planning commission standpoint, we can opine as to how we think our parks can be planned and should be directed for the future. My biggest concern is how do we implement these plans, and that specifically points to funding sources for both new development, maintenance, as well as operations. And so I know a lot of new construction is specifically funded by developers by way of impact fees, landscape and lighting districts, mellow roofs, CFDs. I also know that there was a very strong public and private partnership, especially for the Play for All Park. And I think that a lot of other commissioners have pointed to the Play for All Park as a model for us to really set as a baseline. And I think from a funding standpoint, we should be looking at how the Play for All Park can serve as a guide for us to fund future parks as well. And whether that is a partnership with nonprofits, to help offset some of those costs, whether it's seeking grant funding or whatever mechanism it might be. Knowing what other programs are out there that we may be able to, and I'm sure staff has done a great job of this, but I think it should be noted even further that we should really make a strong effort at securing creative financing, as opposed to making developers shoulder the brunt of the financial responsibility to develop these parks, and just simply going to the voters to ask to approve an additional tax, so that tax will help to fund this as well. I think that being creative is the way to go. For instance, I know Chair McCauley has an extensive background with the Solano Transportation Authority. How can we potentially piggyback on their Safe Routes to Schools program and incorporate some of the Solano Transportation Authority funding into some of our new park developments? I know some developers are utilizing that. I think it should be something that we perhaps include in almost all new developments. Is there an opportunity to utilize STA funds for Safe Routes to Schools as part of our park and trail system in developing new ones? How can we incorporate the Solano Land Trust into some of one of the things, I know it's going to be impossible to produce tonight, but it would be helpful to get a better understanding of the magnitude of the capital that's been produced by already approved tax measures within the city. For instance, Measure I, that was renewed in 2012, which is an annual
per unit tax, as well as Measure M that was approved in 2016. I know that it is noted that the fiscal year one, the budget allocates $225,000 of Measure M funding to parks and recreation. I know that's a drop in the bucket for the public works budget to even maintain these parks, and so I'd like to see what that $225,000 looks like in a percentage of the overall Measure M funds that have been produced, as well as the Measure I. What is that actually producing in a total dollar amount annually? And is there a way that we can look at reallocating some funds from Measure M to maybe improve the amount that the Parks and Recreation Department and Public Works for maintenance are getting, so that they can offset some of those costs? I know Commissioner Alan Johnson mentioned the idea of looking at putting in bathroom facilities in some of these new parks, and I definitely think that should be looked at very, very closely. I think some parks are great to have bathroom facilities, and I think others are thriving because they don't have bathroom facilities. And so I think we need to look at that very closely when we're considering adding or not including them in future park facilities as well. I think that's the bulk of my comments. Just to reiterate, I think the funding sources for implementing this plan is of paramount importance, and we definitely need to keep a close eye on how we're going to bring this plan to.
Commissioner Johnson, were those things you would like to see addressed tonight or at a later time? For example, when this comes back to Parks and Rec or goes on to the City Council?
Thank you for asking. I think it's probably impractical to expect any updates on numbers tonight, so I won't make that request. But I think a similar body, whether it's the Parks and Recs Commission or Council, should be presented what those figures look like, so that they can then make further decisions based on that.
Great, thank you very much. I do have some comments as well. I have about 25 different tabs, but they don't lead to actual comments. I will note that when I listened to the special public meeting held a couple of Saturdays ago, there is quite a bit of discussion on issues of equity. And one thing that as we address that, I want to make sure we look at is that it's equity on the location of facilities, not just where they're planned, where they're actually constructed, and especially on the maintenance of those facilities, and then on access to programs. So I think when we're looking at equity concerns, we need to look universally at that. Looking at not so much the specific criteria for a park, but at the plan as a document, one of the concerns I have, and I'm going to really go to the goals that we have starting on chapter 43, is the fact that they're not prioritized. And so everything is important. And when everything is important, ends up nothing is most important. And it's easy to waste resources when we're not focused on something. I'll notice, for example, on goal number 1, it says support a wide range of opportunities for play with well-designed, inviting, distinct parks. That's actually 2 separate goals. One is to provide lots of facilities. The other is to provide good facilities. And in a time of limited resources, you can have one of those, but you can't have both of those at the same time. And so I think the document needs to go back and spend some time deciding what's most important. Is it having a facility that everybody can get to? Is it having a good nature and open space system? Is it having those facilities that we have are of the highest quality? we need to be a little more focused on those and decide in this plan what is most important. And then when we start recommending on projects and funding, focus on that. I do notice that goal number 7 talks about funding. I think that's important, but I don't think that's a goal. I think that's a tool to get to our goals, and we need to make sure we know the difference between goals and tools. In looking at some of the recommendations on parks or on access and sidewalks, we talked about class 1, 2, and 3 bikeways. We don't talk about class 4, which is something that is like a class 1 on a road, but a curb or other separated way to get there. And I think we need to make sure that those are included in the process. Quite a few comments about making sure we look at unique partnerships and whether those are with the community organizations that help get the Rocky Trail in or the Play for All. I think you're right. Those, everybody who said that, those are key relationships that can let us move things forward. And then finally, coming back to the structure, I'm looking at table 6.3, which is our action plan. I don't see on this, and at least the text on this is large enough I can see it. Commissioner Alan Johnson, I agree. I didn't even get my magnifying glass, but I needed it on a few. But when I get to 6.3, what I don't see is a clear list that says, how do we move from our goals through the prioritization criteria into table 6.3? I would love to see, for example, on Alamo Creek Park, is this on that list because it is a quick win or because it is something that our most important priority is high quality and we need to do this as quality? I don't see that 1 leads to 2 leads to 3 sort of process that I think would make this a much stronger document. I think it's good, but I think there's some things that would make it more usable for the community. And one of those is really saying what our priorities are and then making sure that our goals are aligned with those priorities. So thank you for the long speech. I don't think there's anything that directly needs to be addressed by staff right now, but those are my perspectives. And I don't see any other commissioners with their hands open, so I'm going to go to the public right now and make sure that the members of the public have a chance to participate. Roberto Valdez had his hand up. It's not right now. Roberto, if you want to participate, make sure that we've got it set up, because I know we've had problems with your participation in the past. Right now I see Wendy Brecken and then Steve Ramos and then Marjorie Kelly. So let's go ahead and get Wendy Brecken for your opportunity. Again, we want to try and keep your comments to around 3 minutes. And with that, Wendy, you have the floor.
Hi, thank you very much. I'm really excited about all the hard work you have done and the good comments about creating spaces that are here. What I'm trying to say is that key to a successful city is, I think it's parks, because when, you look at the Vacaville map, you don't see a lot of green. You do see some green. There are some parks. But when you look at the recreational needs assessment from 2012 that Vacaville did, it showed that at the time there was deficiency in parks. And by 2030, it looks like we're going to be needing a whole lot of things, like basketball courts. We're going to be needing soccer field and football fields. It says we need 28, and as of 2012 there was 20. Baseball, softball fields, we need another 10 compared to the 30 that they had in 2012. Gymnasiums, we need 3.5 by 2030 based on the projections of population growth, and there was in 2012, 2.6. So I haven't heard any talk so far about the master plan and how it relates to deficiencies. And that was one of my questions, is have you looked at the 4.5 acres per 1,000 population that Vacaville had decided was the standard? And as of 2030, we need 545 acres of park space, compared to in 2012, we had 260 acres. So I'm thinking in order to have a successful city, in order to attract businesses, have us all have a good quality of life. I think this is a real key, and we should be looking at funding. We have Measure M funding, and as I think Mr. Johnson said, we have Measure I funding, and we can be aggressively pursuing private companies, and have like a their name on the park maybe, or different kind of advertising ideas like blocks, like you're doing for the Play for All. I'm just kind of thinking that there's ways to leverage what money we have, and like you're saying, and going for the private partnerships. As far as the priorities, it seems, I haven't studied this in depth at all, but it seems a little bit arbitrary what priorities we choose, which parks go first, which ones are developed. Seems like a task force might be a good idea to really focus in on, deficiencies versus, what we need versus where the priority should be, and how to pursue funds, and why not just say, here's everything we need. We need 3 Oaks. We need Centennial Park. We need the aspirational projects.
And Wendy, you're a bit over your 3 minutes, so if you could go ahead and wrap up, please.
Sure. And I just think we can also use vacant lots for vegetable gardens or for gathering places for music. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Wendy. And the idea of gathering for music is one that I think many of us found quite attractive these days. Steve Ramos is next on the list. So, Mr. Ramos, you have the floor.
Did I respond to you?
Steve, go ahead. Steve, you show yourself as muted on the screen right now.
There, how's that?
Now we can hear you.
I have co-opted Steve's computer. This is Kathleen Ramos, and I do have a couple of questions that I'd love to have answered. I just listened to Wendy's comments, and one of the things that we could break it down to is the fact that the city has had for a very long time a stated goal of 4.5 acres for every 1,000 people. And as far as I know, we have never met that goal. And I'd like to hear how this master plan helps to reach that goal. And of course, I know that that is not just park space. That includes recreation land, which can be open space, so on and so forth. Second thing is, I've heard a lot of people comment about Play for All. My family has worked on Play for All since its inception, and I have to say this has been blood, sweat, and tears. I don't know that you could find another group of people as dedicated to putting together a park as these folks have been. And I don't know that that is something that you can easily replicate. So I would be very shocked if you could. I'd be absolutely delighted, but I do know that that has been a tremendous amount of work daily. The third thing is addressing CFD funds. CFD is just a newer name for Mello-Roos, basically. And my thought is that that is only workable in new subdivisions. And very much like L&L districts, lighting and landscaping districts throughout the city of Vacaville, it's pretty disproportionate. These are parks that are used by everyone. We have very few private parks, a couple of them throughout the city, but we have very few private parks, which means that they're open for use by everyone, which means everyone should pay their fair share, correct? And that seems to me to not be necessarily a CFD need, but simply a different way of assessing on our tax rolls. So anyway, those are my comments. Hopefully somebody can address those. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ramos. Are there any staff members that would like to address that now, or would you like to listen to all the public comment and then come back at the end? Mr. Baderi, I guess I'll ask you to address how you'd like to proceed.
I think we can try and answer questions as they come up. And I'm afraid I don't have an answer to any of Kathleen's comments. They may be items that we would need to examine the contents of the draft master plan in more detail to come up with some of those answers. But let me ask either the consultant team or the other staff if there's any other information we could provide in response at this time.
Chair McCauley, I could perhaps help out a little bit there.
Go right ahead.
Okay. So Kathleen's absolutely correct that we haven't met our standard of 4.5 acres per 1,000 residents, but we are getting closer to meeting that standard, primarily due to the fact that new subdivisions are now providing their share, for the most part, the larger ones, of the neighborhood park component, which is the piece of the 4.5 acres per 1,000 acres that we are most behind in. So in other words, the 4.5 acres per 1,000 is made up of 1.8 for neighborhood parks, 1.7 for community parks, and 1.0 for regional parks. So we are making progress. This plan also tags on to what the general plan expects in terms of future parks. And the idea is that ultimately we would be able to reach our goal of 4.5, but that's mostly on the backs of new development. That's the difficulty there. And yes, Kathleen, you are absolutely right that having worked sometimes nightly on the Great Wonders Playground, and I know you folks there was so many people involved with that. That is something that takes a huge amount of work by a number of people, and we can't expect every park to follow that kind of dedication by the citizens. It's great, it's wonderful, super community building activity, but it's also bone weary. And also with the CFDs, you are correct that those are primarily for newer subdivisions. It is rare, it can happen, but it is rare where citizens would vote for themselves to be taxed to supply funding for, like we did with Measure M and Measure I, to build up our existing system, to both from a maintenance and also a new construction standpoint. And then finally, I think you were touching perhaps on the concept of a citywide lighting and landscaping district. And once again, I have a hard time when I take calls for people who are asking me, say, why doesn't my shallow looking neighborhood park compare with the new one down the street where the people are paying, a very high fee, well, relatively high fee for the lighting and landscaping district in which they are part of. So that is, I think, something that the city needs to come to some conclusion on, whether we want to try for a citywide park and rec, park lighting and landscaping district. So those are my answers. I hope I touched on your questions properly.
You did. Thanks so much, Hugh.
Thank you. I appreciate your doing that. The next person up is Marjorie Kelly. Marjorie, you've got about 3 minutes to make your comments or ask your questions. You have the floor.
I believe I'm unmuted.
Yeah, we can hear you now. Go ahead.
I just wanted to follow up to the letter that we sent in on the Green Tree Development Park plan. We're in the midst of a planning process right now, and I'd like to clarify that in the current plan, there's envisioned a park on the north part of this Green Tree development that would be family oriented because the north part of the development will be non-age restricted. On the south side of Sequoia, on the south side of the Green Tree project, is where we're talking about a park dedicated to seniors and senior needs. So the idea of having playground and space for children is there will be space for children and playgrounds in the park north of Sequoia. This is an underserved area. The senior park that we're talking about is surrounded by roughly 1,500 senior homes and thousands of over 55. In fact, many are in the 75 to 85 age group. And as I said, it's an underserved area. One of the things that makes this a special request is because many of our citizens have mobility issues. And so they are walking with walkers or they're walking slowly. So our concept is going to be a little different than other places in that we would want the park close to homes so that people may access it easily in order to have lunch with their friends or have a potluck or just do general visiting. We love the idea that everything is going to be connected with walking and biking paths. Many of our seniors, even with limited mobility, do get out and do a lot of walking. But because of age and because of mobility issues, it also creates a safety issue. So when we talk about we'd have to take a look at playgrounds, for example, it may not be something that would be wise to put a playground in the midst of a senior area where you may have people walking slowly, walking with walkers, and so forth, just as a general safety issue for the seniors.
And Marjorie, you're right at the edge of your 3 minutes, so go ahead and wrap up fairly quickly, please.
Okay, what I'd like to say then is that we have two requests. One is that there is outreach to us to talk about a park and the different needs here. And the second is I would like to see explicit language or something that makes it clear that the minimum requirements as they're written now are not, that there can be flexibility and waivers. That's it.
Great. Thank you very much for your participation. Our next person is Jim Robbins. And again, when we're done with the public, I know we'll come back for staff and commission comments. But at this point, we will go on to Jim Robbins.
Good evening. I work with Marjorie on the Golf Course Estates leadership team, and I just wanted to reinforce some of the things that she commented on. Again, we're working with the planning group for the developer or for the landowner, as well as the city on this process. And it's one of the few areas that we've actually found agreement on, to be honest with you, so far. And, again, just to reinforce, there's at least 2 parks involved here, one north of Sequoia, which would be a full family park. But the thing that we're adamant about is that the park that's south of Sequoia, that is nestled in between our homes. I do safety work for a public agency, and you'd be amazed at the number of senior slips and trips and falls from something as simple as a threshold walking into an office. So the idea of having playground equipment just scares me, to have somebody fall, and we don't fall well. So I just want to reinforce that. I read through the language. There is a lot of, these are guidelines and so forth, but I agree with Marge. If there was some specific language that specified that on a case-by-case basis, or whatever language you choose, that there is room to discuss those minimum requirements so that the park truly meets our special recreational experiences that would be stimulating for us and reflect our own character of our neighborhood, which is all 55 and older. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much. I appreciate your comments this evening. Our next speaker is Alicia Minion. Alicia, you have the floor. Go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for the report and the presentation. It's excellent. And but I was wondering, is there going to be any additional analysis done. I guess I wasn't clear in reading the report. I'm interested in considering as that there is a deficiency in parks, as a couple speakers had mentioned. We've never really met our goal on parks, and I'd really like to see why that happened. I think it's important to understand the parks that we have, and to the extent any of them are deficient in size, and how did that transpire? Because I think it's important to know what went wrong, and then look at, okay, what improvements can we make to ensure that prospectively that we have adequate parks. I agree with all the speakers. Parks are of the highest priority. It actually will, I think, it not only is good for our health, I think it is good for our overall environment, atmosphere, and really encouraging people to come and move and stay. And it would be nice to see that we meet our goal on parks or even exceed that goal, and that we have more connectivity with trails and pathways. And there's just this, it just seems like there's this big mystery on how did we end up today? How did the park layout and the park size, how did that all happen? And the other big mystery is how are these parks really funded, and who really paid for them? I heard one commissioner indicate, well, I don't think it's really, I think it's a burden for developers to pay for the parks, but I mean, how much do they really pay? It's my understanding that there's an impact fee assessed when a building permit is pulled, but honestly, when I bought my house, it's a brand new house, I mean, I paid a pretty decent price. You could argue it's market value. I think I probably paid a little bit more than market value for various reasons. And right now, these new homes are selling at record prices. So, and we have no transparency in what the profit margins are for these developers. I think we need to consider who should really pay for the parks. And I think it's a multi-pronged approach. And personally, I'm willing to pay an additional tax for parks, but we have to understand that we have many voter-approved taxes already. Not only do we have the CFDs, but we have, we have Measure M that's bringing in more than anticipated. That's about 17 million. Measure I believe, brings in around 4 million. We have a paramedic ambulance tax that brings in about 5 million.
And Alicia, we also have a 3-minute time limit, and you're right at the edge of it. So you can go ahead and wrap up, please. Okay, so we have about 30 million in voter-approved revenue. We have record assessed valuations. So I mean, I just think we need to really look at, do some deeper analysis, and then really understand what money is being, especially voter approved money that was voted specifically for parks, or at least that covers parks, and really come up with a plan on how to fund the parks and really meet or exceed the goals prospectively. Thank you. Great, Alicia, I appreciate your participating tonight. I don't see any more new hands up. I see Marjorie's is still up, but you've had a chance to speak already. Then Mr. Valdez, who had his hand up, it was up and then disappeared again. Roberto, if you want to speak, now is the time to go ahead and participate. And if staff could try and make sure that Roberto is connected so we can hear his input. I know that that's sometimes been a challenge with his connection. So staff is Mr. Valdez. I'd like to hear him if it's clear. Go ahead, and if he needs to call in, let's make that happen. While they're trying to get Roberto Valdez connected, I want to go back and see if, before we close the public comments, we can hear you now. Go ahead, Roberto.
Okay, I'm sorry if I'm interrupting you, what you're saying, Mr. McCauley. I respect your statements. And let me just say that, again, I feel like I'm catching up with the presentation, as well as with the survey that was done for many reasons. I won't go into it. but I appreciate the opportunity to speak to all of you. Anyway, basically, I looked at the park plan, master plan that you had on your site, on your website this afternoon. And I can tell you that, number one, I appreciate that you included that extra letter that was submitted by Mr. and I'm saying, excuse me, Lawrence Smith and Ellie Laurie. I believe that's her correct pronunciation. I just want to say I support their views, and I would like even second them if I could. But I do have a little bit to say about the whole point of that was brought up earlier about equity, and that is, I think, and I'm speaking particularly from Lagoon Valley, because even though I appreciate and I see the value of all the parks in our city that are here or have been and will be coming from all the development, I'm speaking particularly about Lagoon Valley because it tends to be more rural and more isolated thanks to the Vaca Mountains and blank. Anyway, and it's more historical, I would say so. Time-wise, history of Vacaville. But what I want to say to you is that I think the city needs to, as far as equity, hire either another park ranger or some sort, especially Lagoon Valley, again, to represent our community at large. I do like the service that included Lagoon Valley, but I think and Peña Adobe also, because I see them as one integral rather than two separate entities, and they're in that area, and you know, we need to remember Lagoon Valley. If nothing else, remember Lagoon Valley for what I just told you, historical reason. It's what the city and the people of Vacaville treasure. And this is not the first survey you've done. You've done plenty. The city's done plenty over the past 20 years. I can mention at least 3 of them. But this is one that needs to be respected and included, and people need to be reminded about and say what you have to say. I'm sorry if I'm being direct there too. The other thing is that I've looked at my feeling is that, and I've looked at a lot of the points, at least the ones that I thought they were being addressed, and I don't think it includes enough recommendations about environmental conservation. I speak from section B16 to B19, especially with regards to the Malaca Creek, which is so-called Malaca Creek. That's the creek adjacent to east of Peña Adobe and west of Lagoon Valley Lake.
And Roberto, you're just past your 3 minutes, so if you could go ahead and wrap up quickly, please.
Sure. And then, okay, thank you, Mr. McCauley, and I apologize if I'm taking one more extra minute. But I'm
not a whole minute, it's a wrap up.
Okay, well, okay, but I'm concerned about especially the impact to the birds and aquatic fish that may be impacted by the recreational, such as the duck lovers and model plane users. Again, you know, and then there's really, you need to address how the city intends to increase the users, recreational users, and also make it easier accessibility to the park, especially with regard to the entry fees and making more available, maybe public transportation. You know, I've brought this up before about including maybe electrical buses system. We have buses, and we have their electrical ones. So why don't we, you know, add to that and add to the improving the climate change and air pollution in our whole state.
Okay, and Roberta, I think I've given you as much over your time as you can. So I do need to wrap there. I appreciate the input, but we do need to stay kind of close to our 3 minutes for everybody. I'm going to, before I fully close the public portion, see if there's any staff responses that they'd like to make to what we heard from the public right now, or any commissioner comments, and then we'll close the public and do a wrap up. But staff, at this point, anything that you wish to talk about in response to what you heard from the public?
This is Fred Buderi. Chair McCauley, I'll just wrap up from the staff side by saying these comments will be forwarded on to the Parks and Recreation Commission as well for their review as they work on finalizing the plan. The comments we received regarding flexibility in the park design standards especially from the residents near in golf course estates are very timely and helpful. I do want to point out we did receive that second letter. This was coming from the Green Tree Golf Course project applicants themselves, also asking for that same type of flexibility in design standards as they work on their own master plan for the project itself. And that correspondence has now been forwarded to you. I think I said mistakenly at the beginning of the meeting that we had sent it before we actually had got that to you. And then, yes, there is time to do additional analysis, I think, of some of the points that have been made. Specifically, we can zero in a little more detail on where the general plan will take the park system in terms of meeting the park standards. So a couple of folks have asked about that, how our acreage is doing, and Park Planner Hesterman did clarify that we are getting closer to meeting the city's standard for goals for park acreage. And maybe we can follow up on that and provide some more specifics by the time this goes to any further hearings. And then Parks and Recreation staff or consultants, are there any details that you'd like to comment on before we move on?
And actually, Fred, just before we do that, question for you from a community development side. Is adoption of a plan like this or other master plans subject to CEQA, where any of the, for example, fish and wildlife impacts that Mr. Valdez was concerned about would come up, or is a plan not CEQA, but then subsequent development would be?
Each subsequent development would be subject to CEQA. In the case of a master plan, it is generally considered to be within the scope of the impacts addressed in the general plan. This is an implementation action coming from the general plan itself, and so is reviewed for consistency with the general plan, but the specific park plans as they are implemented, we would be subject to specific environmental analysis.
Okay, thanks. And I'm sorry if I cut off any other staff members of the consultants. And I see Hugh Hesterman would like to speak again, and Lauren also has her mic open. So Hugh and then Lauren, go ahead.
Sure. Thank you, Chair McCauley. I've heard a little bit of discussion or questioning about how we got to being behind, if you will, in our park acreage standard. And that's a little bit not quite the right way to look at it, because we actually boosted our standard. It was, I think, first created in 1972 at 2.5 acres per 1,000 residents. And then in the era of 1990, along with that general plan of that same era, a range was increased in its range from 4.5 to 5 acres per 1,000 residents. And of course, we were not achieving it at that point, but it was a goal. It was something that the city felt so strongly about that they wanted to boost what we were providing. And so they provided this goal of 4.5 to 5 acres per 1,000 residents. And then that came back to, instead of a range, it settled in finally in, I think, 1992 at the 4.5. So it has all along been a goal that we are trying to achieve, and not something that we have, I wouldn't say we've fallen short, but that we are trying to get there. Hopefully that clarifies it a little bit.
Thank you. And then Lauren, you have your mic open, so go ahead.
Not looking to steal Carrie's thunder, but it was really nice to hear community members and commissioners talking about funding and, wanting to see parks prioritized. That came out through the engagement process, and that's definitely been a challenge. And so really nice to hear that. I imagine Carrie really appreciates that too.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lauren. Chair McCauley, this is Director Walker. Yes, it's so refreshing to hear the support for parks. I think there has been a strong support for parks for quite some time. As Park Planner Hugh Hesterman mentioned, you know, that when the general plan was updated and there was a steering committee working on the general plan, and it was adopted in 2015, you know, one of the things that the folks on the steering committee made very clear was that they did not want the standard reduced and wanted to stick with the 4.5 acres per 1,000 residents. And it's nice to hear the support for parks.
Thanks, Carrie. I'm looking at our public list and I don't see anybody there who has not already spoken. So I'm going to go ahead and close the public portion of this and bring it back to an opportunity for any of the commissioners with final questions or comments. Commissioner Beaumont has his hand up first, so you have the floor.
Thank you, Commissioner Colley. I just want to comment on Ms. Kelly and her comments on page 94, the neighborhood parks location for minimum park features. And the first minimum park feature is playground or play environment for children 2 to 5 or 5 to 12. And I think there should be an asterisk there that says can be adjusted for senior park areas, and just to give it some leeway for some type of elimination of that if necessary for senior areas, that they don't have to deal with that. So just my comment on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Beaumont. Any other commissioner comments at this point? I don't see any hands coming up. I know this is an information item. There is no formal action for the commission to take at this point. Fred, is there anything else that you need from us, or are we ready to be done with this and move on to the next item? Mr. Paderi, you have the floor, or are we ready to move on?
We are ready. I thank you very much for the comments. Again, all of the information will be held and presented to the Park and Recreation Commission.
Great. We just spent 2 hours with the Planning Commission talking about a document that another commission will ultimately take action on. I think that says quite a bit how important Parks and Recreation are to everyone here and to the members of the community. And with that, let's move on to item 8B, which is the annual status report on the status of the general plan and the housing element. And it looks like Tyra will be making the presentation. Again, for members of the public, while this is primarily, or at least initially, a staff discussion, there will be a chance for public comment later on. But with that, I'll turn things over to Tyra and the staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good evening, Commissioners. Tonight's project is a state-mandated report on the general plan and the housing element. This is a required document that must be submitted to the Governor's Office of Planning and Research, as well as the State Department of Housing and Community Development by April 1st of each year. Prior to our submittal of the document, it must be viewed by our Planning Commission, and following that, it will be shared with our City Council next month. Next slide, please. So the main purpose of this document is to ensure that our general plan is a living document. The state would like to ensure that these documents are being used actively and that they can be reviewed and improved as necessary to best meet the needs of the community. And it's also to help the city identify priorities for the following year. So the project tonight provides a status of the policies, goals, and actions of four different documents associated with our general plan. In 2015, our current general plan was adopted along with our housing element, the city's climate action plan, known as the Energy Conservation Action Strategy, and lastly, it was adopted with a programmatic EIR, which covered both the general plan and the ECAS document. Each of these documents does include a list of actions, measures, and programs that the city has committed to reviewing on an annual basis and implementing as part of ensuring that our general plan is indeed a living document. Next slide, please. So to kind of just touch upon these documents at a high level, every year we try to give everyone a snapshot of what has occurred. In the year 2020, the city received 3 applications for general plan amendments. Some of these you may recall being informed about early last year. One of those includes a general plan land use diagram amendment for a warehouse building located on Vacaville Parkway. That project was approved not only for its general plan amendment, but I do believe the project itself was approved and may currently be under construction. A little later in the year, the city received another application to consider the merits of a general plan amendment to allow additional development east of Leisure Road as part of a project being called the Fields at Alamo Creek. This would require both a general plan amendment as well as an annexation into the city. And lastly, the city has its own city-sponsored general plan amendment request to include vehicular miles traveled measures in our general plan to be consistent with state law. The purpose of this law is to identify ways to reduce vehicular travel in order to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Being that the VMT policies are intended to meet the same intent of our Energy Conservation Action Strategy Plan, and that is to reduce our greenhouse gases, we are currently working on both documents simultaneously. You may recall having seen this document in previous presentations. As part of that project, we are also working on conducting and preparing a supplemental EIR. Next slide, please. So the city has been working on a number of very large and complicated projects that implement numerous policies and actions identified in our general plan. Those documents are currently in progress, and we are currently recommending that they remain our priority for the year 2021. Those documents include the completion of our AB 1600 Development Impact Fee Study, the completion of our Master Infrastructure Studies, which also lead into the update of our Capital Improvement Program project list. We are currently also approaching the completion of our Comprehensive Zoning Code update. We are also hoping to complete our Downtown Specific Plan later this year. And we are just now beginning the initial stages of working on our next housing element update. Next slide, please. So the remainder of the presentation is mainly going to focus on the housing element. As mentioned previously, the housing element is one of the required chapters of our general plan. Unlike the remainder of the general plan, we are required by state law to update this on an 8-year cycle. And the document has very specific requirements that we meet. Next slide, please. So some of the overarching things that we must address is to make sure we include and implement policies to address all income groups within our community. We do have to report on standardized forms in terms of how we are doing in meeting our goals and actions. And this is one of the documents that is required to be submitted to the state by April 1st in order to remain eligible for various grant funding. Next slide, please. So just to give a very quick high-level review of what the housing element is and where it comes from, I thought I would share a little information with you. The city of Vacaville is part of the 9-county Bay Area of Governments region. This is what we call a Council of Governments region in which there is a high-level organization and preparation of all things related to both housing and transportation. Next slide, please. As part of the housing element, we are required to address the housing needs as assigned to us over the 8-year planning period. How this works is every 8 years or so, the state at the state level will determine what the region's fair share of the state's housing is. Once they have that number, they then give it to the Council of Governments region. As I mentioned, we are part of ABAG. That stands for the Association of Bay Area Governments. Once they have that number, they apply several metrics to it, and then they then give us what they call our regional housing allocation number. This is the number of housing units we must prepare to provide opportunities for construction within our community over the 8-year planning period. Once we have our number, we then update our housing element accordingly. That includes identifying goals, actions, and policies to ensure that we are meeting all the facets of housing element law. Once the document is created, it is then again submitted back to the state and then certified. Next slide, please. So our current housing element covers 2015 through the year 2022. This is 2023 only because the time period ends on December 31st, 2022. As part of this housing element cycle, our regional housing needs allocation was to prepare for 1,084 total housing units as broken down by income groups shown on the screen. I'm going to explain what that means more in just a moment. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we are required under this housing element cycle to provide the housing opportunity for just a little under 1,100 units, but more so, we have to provide for housing at different income groups. The income groups are based on a certain percentage of the county's area median income. The area median income for Solano County in the year 2020 was just over $95,000 for a household consisting of 4 people. So for a household to be considered a very low income household, they can make no more than 50% of that area median income, which equates to just under $43,000. A low income household would be 80% of that number, and a moderate income household would be 120% of the area median income. And what this means in terms of affordability is also shown only for illustration purposes on this slide. So it's really hard to determine what any individual household can afford in terms of housing. So what we do is when we do our housing element and prepare our annual reports is provide an illustration of a best case scenario of what is affordable to these various income groups. So in the case of a very low income household consisting of 4 people, if we assume that they qualify for an FHA loan, which does require a lower down payment ranging in between 3.5 to 4% down, and again, this is best case scenario, we assume that no more than 30% of their monthly income goes towards housing and that they have no other monthly liabilities. Under that best case scenario, a very low income household could afford a maximum purchase price of $220,000. The intent of this slide is not to mislead anyone. It's just there's a lot of factors to be considered when evaluating what any specific household can afford in terms of housing. So again, I would like to emphasize this is for illustration purposes only. Next slide, please. So here is kind of the heart of our housing element annual progress report for the year 2020. On the first line, you see the city's RHNA number. Again, that is our regional housing need allocation that covers the 8-year housing planning period. Last year, we had issued a total of 678 total residential units. I believe 245 of those units was incorporated or was included in one apartment complex. I just wanted to call that out. But of the total housing units that were issued for last year, 10 of those units were determined to be affordable to very low and low income households. In this case, those 10 units were created in the form of accessory dwelling units. We had 32 homes that were affordable to moderate income households. Those were some of these smaller house plans within our larger brand new residential subdivisions. And the remainder of the units were affordable to the above moderate income households. Again, moderate income households was any household consisting of 4 people or more that could afford over $550,000 for a home. As I mentioned, the housing element does cover an 8-year planning period. So the third row shows what we've done to date within the planning period of the housing element. And we have issued a lot of housing permits. Here we show that we've issued just over 2,300 housing permits. And we once again broke them down into the various income groups. And as you can see, the majority of the homes that were issued permits since 2015 were deemed to be affordable to those households making above moderate incomes. The very last line shows that we have done quite well in meeting our RHNA needs for our moderate and above moderate income group, but we do need some additional work to provide additional housing opportunities for very low and low income households. Next slide, please. So in 2020, as I mentioned, we issued a lot of residential units permits. The active communities last year included Ashton Place, Brighton Landing, the Farmstead subdivision, North Village, Danton Estates, and the Strata 1200 apartment complex. With the exception of the apartment complex, the approximate house size of these communities ranged from roughly 1,550 square feet to just over 3,000 square feet. And the cost ranged from roughly $540,000 to over $800,000. I should note that this is a brief summary of one of the standardized tables provided in your packet. This slide correlates with Table A2. Next slide, please. So another requirement of our standardized housing element tables is to identify new housing applications that were submitted over the past year. You may have heard some of these, because I do believe they have been reviewed with the Planning Commission. The new housing applications include an application for the Harbison Townhome Apartments, which was just approved by both the Planning Commission and the City Council. That project consists of 160 units. We have an application in for the Alamo Creek subdivision, which I believe is located within the Southtown subdivision area. We have an application in for the Village Townhomes located on Butcher Road. As I mentioned earlier, we have a general plan amendment application in for the Fields at Alamo Creek. This is located within the East Elysia Town Growth area. If approved or supported, that would include 174 units. We have an application in for the Peabody Apartments for 120 units. And then we've received 2 preliminary applications for the Habitat for Humanity project, which includes 14 total units. Some of those are accessory dwelling units. And the second preliminary application is for the Oak Grove Apartment project, which includes 67 units. So we have seen a lot of action in terms of people wanting to construct housing within our community. Next slide, please. Another requirement of implementing our general plan is to ensure that we are maintaining, to the best of our ability, a citywide housing mix of approximately 75% single-family homes and 25% multifamily attached housing. Please note that the table shown on your screen does differ from the table that was provided, I believe, as attachment 3 in your packet. I did find a calculation error. Correcting that error, it looks like as of right now, the city is comprised of roughly 78% single-family homes and 22% multifamily homes. Next slide, please. So that does conclude my presentation. I would like to note that as part of your packet, you also did receive an annual report from our housing department in terms of their housing activities. Should the Planning Commission have any questions about that document, I do believe we have someone from our housing department on the call that may be able to answer those questions. Otherwise, this concludes the presentation. It is informational in nature. following this presentation, it will be shared with the City Council sometime in March. Thank you.
Thank you, Tyra. Do any of the commission members have questions for staff at this point? I see Commissioner Beaumont's hand is up. Go ahead, Commissioner Beaumont.
Thank you, Chair. Tyra, thank you very much. I'm looking at the table on page 302, and it shows the low, very low, and moderate number of homes that we've produced over the years since 2015. And there was none in 2018, 3 in 2019, and a total of 42 in 2020. So I'm wondering, how do we get to the 302 that are due by 2023?
Well, that's a very good question, and I'm glad you answered it, because it's important for everyone to understand that the city is not required to require developers to build this housing. That is still something that a developer has a choice over. It is state law's requirement that we provide the opportunity for this type of housing to be constructed. And more importantly, it's really imperative that we look at ways to incentivize this housing. To be honest, it's very challenging for any city to provide very low and low income housing now that there is no longer redevelopment funding available. So cities and other jurisdictions are having to be quite creative in terms of incentivizing and encouraging this type of development. That is something that the city is working with not only within itself, but also with other jurisdictions up and down the state of California. We do have an adequate land inventory. Now it's just a matter of working with developers to find a way to incentivize this development and to encourage them to develop it.
So does the state do anything to Vacaville if we don't get the 302 units by 2023?
It does not.
Okay, so it's just a goal. It's not a stated action.
It's only a stated action in terms of we have to provide for the opportunities. We are required by state law to remove any governmental constraints for that type of housing. So if it's been brought to our attention that something we are doing provides a unnecessary constraint, we are required by state law to address it.
Great, thank you very much.
And Commissioner Beaumont, in the past, regional agencies such as MTC have actually proposed limiting access to regional transportation funds for those cities that don't find a way to actually construct those units. And I don't know if there was actually a policy they ever adopted, but at one point it was something that they were talking about.
Well, I knew that I knew the governor had stated that, but I didn't know if that was actually a law or not.
Not at state level, but I know the regional agency was talking about that as a transportation funding policy.
Great, thank you.
Commissioner Alan Johnson, you have the floor. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Tyra, for your presentation, and thank you for always being available to answer questions when I have them. With regard to our RHNA numbers, I was just wondering, how does Vacaville compare with other cities in our region, if you know? And if there's somebody that's doing it better, do we know how they incentivize developers to work on those lower end houses?
Well, I'm most familiar with the jurisdictions within Solano County. City staff does attend a monthly meeting with representatives from the other jurisdictions within the county, and we're currently discussing the upcoming new housing element cycle. And one thing that's come to our attention is a lot of us are dealing with the exact same issues. Previously, cities relied heavily on the use of redevelopment funds to help subsidize or incentivize this type of housing. Since the dissolution of RDA in 2012, there have been a handful of proposed funding programs, but to my knowledge, they've not yet been as successful. There are some jurisdictions, to my knowledge, that have done a little better than we have in terms of providing additional multifamily housing. Sometimes that's based on just the community itself. Some communities are more accepting and even encouraging of multifamily housing. Usually you'll find that in more urban areas. Sometimes it has to do with the type of land that's available. And other times it's just they have a different financing mechanism that's not available to us currently. It has been brought to our knowledge that sometimes our fee structure is foreseen as an impediment. That is something that we are currently looking at in great depth as part of our AB 1600 Development Impact Fee Study. And that will be something that will be incorporated into our next housing element. But honestly, I do believe, based on my knowledge of housing element updates, this is a pretty significant issue that all California jurisdictions struggle with.
Okay, thank you very much.
Any other commissioners with questions or comments? Tyra, my only comment is looking at the page 227 when we're looking at the status and the implementation tasks currently in project, currently in progress, that the infrastructure and facilities plan, the AB 1600 study is there. I think that's going to be one of our most important documents in the next couple of years because of both the impact of those fees and the projects that it lets us build that then make it a better community, such as parks and recreation that we're just talking about. Talk about a two-edged sword of you need the finances to do important things, but the fees that get the finances make it difficult to do the affordable housing. I don't think there's an easy answer, but at least that's an important document to update. And while I was talking, no other hands came up, so I'm going to turn things to an opportunity for members of the public to speak and address this particular issue. The first hand up I see is Alicia Minion. Alicia, you have the floor for about 3 minutes.
Hi, thank you so much for the presentation. I have, let's see, I wanted to bring up a couple of points. You had mentioned that it's difficult to get developers to actually build and deliver affordable housing. And affordable housing has a lot of meanings to different people. So when I say affordable housing, I'm looking at the RENA numbers, the low, the very low, and the extremely low. And in any event, you mentioned, you know, what could be some of the incentives. I don't know what incentives other communities, other cities have utilized. I don't know what the universe of those incentives are, but I did notice something when the Strata 1200 development, before it actually went to Planning Commission, I believe that that particular land that it was built on, it was, it had to be rezoned. I think it was zoned commercial or mixed use commercial, and it was rezoned to residential high density. I remember reading the staff report, and I want to say, I think it was in maybe April of 2018, around that time. And it indicated that the applicant that had planned a project for that land had available to them potential subsidies, including density bonuses from, I think it was MTC OBAG. And so really, as a resident, when I was on the receiving end of that presentation, I walked away with the impression that basically council was sort of compelled to agree to the rezoning because the applicant would pursue these subsidies to ultimately provide below market rents. It was very disappointing when Strata 1200 was ultimately built that it was luxury apartments 100% with no units of below market rents. I believe in that situation, when an applicant needs to have the land rezoned in order to build whatever it is they want to build, I think that was the perfect opportunity to negotiate with the developer. Look, we're not going to rezone it unless you provide some number of below market rents. And I think we need to look at these developments, the ones that we have on the table, the ones that can prop up in the future. To the extent we have any leverage, I think we need to utilize it. I don't think we have to use a heavy hand, but I think it's completely reasonable to negotiate something like that. But this isn't my expertise, and I'd really like the staff's feedback on, you know, if with what I'm saying is it completely unreasonable, I just think there's ways that we can incentivize the production of below market rents. And I just think ultimately we need a committee, a housing element committee, to address issues like this. And this type of committee actually exists in the city of Davis. And I would really
and Alicia, you're just
okay,
beyond your 3 minutes, so quick wrap up, please.
Okay, yeah, and I would just encourage that a committee like that be formed, consisting of citizens, planning commissioners, and experts, so that we're ready to create a better housing element when it expires in 2023. Thank you for your time.
And I don't see any other community members with their hands up, so I'll see if staff wants to address that before I go back to the commission for any final comments. Staff, any further input on community input so far?
The one thing I would like to mention is we are in the initial stages of updating our housing element for the next housing element cycle. There have been significant changes in housing element law. I think we're upwards of 30 new laws that we have to take into consideration. Based on my limited understanding of all of them at this point in time, they are more strict in terms of what the cities can and cannot do when it comes to rezoning properties. So some of the perceived shortcomings of our existing housing elements are highly likely to be addressed with our next housing element. And I would encourage people to participate in that process. And as we gear up to begin that process, there will be significant public outreach to encourage that participation level.
Thank you, Tyra. And I saw Roberto's hand was briefly raised and then is gone. I don't know if, and his hand is back up. Mr. Valdez, you have the floor for 3 minutes. Go ahead. And staff, it sounds like we may need to help get Roberto on the line a little bit. Or his hand has disappeared. Right now, I'm going to go back and see if there's any other commissioner comments at this time, or...
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Roberto. Go ahead. Your 3 minutes are started now.
I'm having a tough time with this online stuff. Okay, but pardon me. You know, I'm kind of just reflecting on what I heard, and tell me if I'm incorrect of what I heard. What was going on with the Harbison Townhouse project? There was mention about some element of senior housing included, and I think what I heard today from your presenters, and I appreciate that that it's up to the developer whether you have low income housing or not. But I didn't hear very much about senior housing, and I heard from the last project that of the townhouse project that senior housing pretty much falls in that bracket to a low income housing. So is the city doing any incentivizing to get the developers to do so? And if not, can you open the process for developers who are interested in coming up with a more balanced cities, you know, or society that we need to, because we need to address not only the people low income and the seniors, and we have a lot of seniors in this county, in this city, Vacaville, but we need to also address the homeless issue. And I think the city is doing a lot of things, and you have a lot of pressure. I understand about the ABAC pressure and all that, and the lack of funding you were getting from the state before, and you don't longer have it anymore, the redevelopment funding. But you know, is this the kind of society we want? Is this the kind of city we want? I see a lot of people on the streets in Vacaville. I see a lot of poor people, and I don't understand why the city is not doing enough of that. So can somebody in your staff address this issue? Or is this just a political issue?
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Go ahead.
The one thing I would like to mention is tonight's presentation really focused on us meeting our RENA numbers. However, as part of our housing element, we are required to address special groups as well. Those groups do include seniors as well as homeless individuals, as well as a whole host of other groups. It's just we don't report on them in the same manner that we do our RENA numbers.
And I think it's also worth noting that many of these issues ultimately go to the city council. As a planning commission, we deal with a silo, but the council is where ultimately all these things are brought together and addressed. I see another hand is up on the public comment for Wendy Brecken. So Wendy, you have the floor for about 3 minutes. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you. I really appreciate that the housing elements being redone, and I just look forward to making comments. I agree with the previous caller about senior housing. I think that is a dire issue here. I think we need to really figure out how other cities incentivize things like, affordable senior housing. And also the review of projects, how that gets done. I'm not sure how the planning department, how that relates to the housing. I know there's not a housing element department, but whoever does the housing element, how they coordinate. And maybe that's my question to you.
Steph, is there anything you want to talk about for how the city's housing process works?
Well, historically, the housing element is prepared in-house, and it includes staff from both community development as well as our housing department. Does that answer your question? Or
what does the housing department do, Tyra?
Well, I guess the question is, how is the housing element implemented? How, can the planning department just ignore it when they're reviewing projects?
We cannot ignore it. It is one of the mandated chapters of our general plan, and all projects that are approved within our community must be consistent with general plan policies. So it is taken into consideration, and we must make a determination that it is consistent with our general plan, or conversely, we have to amend the general plan, which of course the housing element is a part of.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tyra. And I don't see any other public hands raised, so I'm going to bring things back to the commission for any final questions for staff or comments. Any commissioner, and again, this is not an action item, but we're asking for general feedback. I see Commissioner Brent Johnson with his hand up. Commissioner, you have the floor.
I appreciate it. Tyra, thanks again for the presentation on the RENA allocation, why it's important to the city of Vacaville, and how it really drives the housing element and how we look at future housing for the community. I think this is an imperative topic to continue to make presentations on, if not for the benefit only of the community, because I think that there is a strong disconnect with the requirements of meeting our RENA allocations and striving to hit all of those numbers, especially with respect to the low and very low income categories. And when we have, in my opinion, great potential projects being contemplated in our community that will take out a significant number of these type of units, that the staff and applicants spend extra time trying to educate the neighborhood and community as to the benefits of these types of projects to the community, not only for the constituents of that neighborhood and the community itself, but also the larger city, and as it relates to the RENA allocation requirement. And so I think we need to continue the conversation and the topic of the RENA numbers, and really hammer down its importance in the future planning needs of the city. So thanks, Tyra.
Any other commissioners with comments or questions? Seeing none, I will turn this back to Fred. I think that this is no formal action for us to take. I'll simply pass our comments along to the city council when they consider this at a future date. Do I have that correct?
You have that correct, and that future date will be in the month of March. We have not picked an exact council meeting yet, but we will be going to council in March and then forwarding on the report when ready to the state.
Great, thank you very much. We will now move on to item 8C, which is a brief history of the name for Trower Park. On staff, I don't know how you want to approach this, but you have the floor.
Okay, I'll address this one. So at your last meeting, the Planning Commission heard a presentation on the Brown Markham Neighborhood Recreation Improvements Plan. And during that discussion, there was some question about the history of Trower Park, which is one of the subject parks under review in that neighborhood. In particular, history of the name came up, and where did the name Trower Park come from? And could the park be renamed? So we don't have a presentation plan for you on this item. We did have planning technician Maya Amachai prepare some research information for the commission so you could have some background on where the name Trower Park came from. We will forward that information on to the Parks and Recreation Commission for consideration as they look at that neighborhood park improvement plan. And we'd be happy to forward any additional comments on the topic from the commission if you have any, but that's really the scope of the memo that you have in your packet. No further presentation from the staff on this.
Fred, thanks for following up on a question that was raised at a previous meeting. I'll ask if any members of the commission have questions for staff or comments they want to make on this information. I see Commissioner Beaumont's hand is up. Commissioner Beaumont, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Fred, I appreciate the background on this, and I think it's imperative that we keep it as Trower Park. I think people have grown up there since 1977 relating to that, and I think if we changed it, that it would reduce all their memories to nothing, and I think it's important with the cancel culture we have that we just keep it the way it is.
Thank you very much.
Commissioner Beaumont. Commissioner Aldrich, your hand is up. You have the floor.
I 100% agree with Commissioner Beaumont. I think these traditions in Vacaville with these families that came back in the 1800s are very important to keep going. I really appreciated the letter that was written and included in our packet. Some of the family members, of course, are still here, and I think the tradition should continue.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner. I do see Mr. Valdez would like to address this particular issue. So Roberto, we're going to give you a quick shot to address the question on the Trower Park name. Go ahead. And I know it usually takes a moment for Roberto's connection to come through. While we're trying for that, do any other commissioners have questions or comments? I can hear you now. Go ahead, Roberto.
Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't click the unmuted part. But again, I just want to reiterate that I read the letter too, and I respect the commissioner's views and anybody's views on this. And I can understand. I was very moved by the letter itself. And I think it's a worthy name for that park. And I've also worked near that park at the Boys and Girls Club back in 2010 during the census, and I saw people using it, and so it's a very nice park. It's nice to have it in a very, I consider probably a low income community there. I don't know, mix. I'm not sure of the economics there level, and to me it doesn't really matter. The fact is that park's been there, and the name seems very worthy. But at the same time, I also respect the fact that people change, communities change, neighborhoods change, and there should be an opportunity for people who have other ideas of what to rename the park or some other park in somebody else's memory or honor or whatever, that they be allowed to do so, and that you allow that process to continue. So again, I don't live there, so it's really up to the residents there, and I respect that.
Thank you, Mr. Valdez. I don't see any other hands up on this particular issue. Again, Fred, this was just an information report. You've heard 2 commissioner and 1 public comment. So I think we're done with item 8 business in general, and we are ready to move on to item 9, which is the status report on development and major projects. And it looks like we're starting with the building division and Mr. Salazar. Go right ahead, Jake.
Yes, good evening, commissioners and honorable chairperson. This is our report for January of this year. As you can see, January inspections ran slightly lower than the same time last year, about 986 distributed among 3 inspectors. That would be the middle bar that you're seeing on the screen. The dash bars represent last year's numbers at the same time. The single-family residential units, final inspections, we're talking about the housing element tonight. And to give you a little update, at least in January, we gave final inspection approval to 15 single-family homes. And of those 986 inspections, they were distributed among 4 of us in the building department. I do inspections when either the staff are ill or on vacation. 166 were completed by Inspector Bastilia, 498 by Inspector Howlett, and 249 inspections completed by Mr. O'Kander, who also serves as the city's plan reviewer for the building standards. Building permit applications. This is a trend line that I always like to give you information on so you could compare it to see how building applications are trending in comparison to last year. As you can see from the January numbers, we are slightly above last year's number of applications submitted for building permits. And the trend is pretty consistent. We always start to dip down in December and January, and then we start to go back up in February, March, and heading into June. January permits issued. Now, these are different than the applications. So permits issued are the number of permits that we actually issue for work being done. That was slightly lower this January than last January, but not by much, with a total of 330 permits were issued this year. And as you can see from the trend line, we're almost trending exactly the way we were trending last fiscal year. So really the pandemic has had very, very little effect on at least permit activity in Vacaville this entire year. Of those permits, of those 330 permits that were issued, Kristen Vitello processed 40 single-family dwelling units, which is really a high-intensity level of work. Each permit takes a lot of calculations and research to verify that we haven't missed anything that's in a development agreement or something like that. So we take we expend a lot of effort in reviewing and processing our single-family dwelling unit permits. Of those 330 permits, 47% of those permits were actually issued online directly. So the applicant just simply went onto our website, picked the permit that they wanted to obtain, paid for it online, and then they received it online. So slightly less than half of the 330 permits were issued in that manner. Of the remaining permits, Debbie Fowler and Rebecca Diaz processed the remaining 136 permits in January. And then I always like to end this presentation with an update on the vital role that the building department plays in meeting our ECAS goals. And as you can see, this is the number of solar permits that we've issued. In January, we almost doubled last year's amount that we issued in January, which is a very good sign. As you can tell, for the last 4 months, we've exceeded the previous year's 4 months pretty consistently. But as happens every year during the winter months, there's always a cycle downward in terms of the volume of solar permits that are issued. But we are doing quite well and I think a lot of that has to do with the ease in which solar companies can obtain permits through our online system. And that concludes my presentation. I'll be happy to answer any questions if you'd like.
Mr. Salazar?
Yes, sir.
No, I was asking, I don't see any commissioners with their hands up for questions for Jay. So we will move on to advanced planning. And it looks like we get Tyra back for that. Tyra, go ahead.
Chair McCauley, I can, this is Fred Buderi. I can step in there to go through a few items for advanced planning. Other than, a very big item is the item that Tyra did report on earlier. So compiling this annual report for the state of California is a big effort each year. Does have to be turned in by April. So that's going on. Other items that the advanced planning group are working on, Green Tree, of course, and we heard some input on that related to the park master plan. The vehicle miles traveled and ECAS update for policies and mitigation measures to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The city staff and consultant team expect to issue the environmental impact report for that update to the city's general plan and environmental standards very soon. It should be issued within the next few weeks, or at least by March. And we may be coming to the Planning Commission with a public comment hearing on that environmental impact report during its comment period. Public notice will be sent out on that before we make that final determination. The downtown specific plan continues. And then, as Tyra mentioned, the housing element, the preliminary startup information and information gathering and work with the state and ABAG staff is going forward on that. So building up the scoping and the understanding of the contents of the housing element. And then finally, the staff have been assisting the Parks and Recreation Department on the Park Master Plan update and the Utilities Department on their Recycled Water Master Plan, a similar master plan update project. So I think that would cover it, the highlights for the advanced planning group.
Any questions on advanced planning? No hands are up. Let's go on to current planning.
Good evening, Chair and members of the Planning Commission. This is Albert Enault. Here to give you an update on activity for current planning during January. This map shows you what activity looks like throughout the city. The purple dots represent plan reviews that were conducted by the current planning division, and the blue squares represent planning applications that were received. So going through each particular district, in District 1, a new project that we did receive was a conditional use permit for Ramen 101, and that's to establish a restaurant within an existing 5,700 square foot tenant space over at Nut Tree Village at 1637 East Monte Vista. Some of the purple dots represented in District 1 include farmstead plot plans, some sign permits, some tenant improvements but also some residential patio covers and swimming pools. In District 2, we received a new project, the Toyota service building, and what Toyota is looking at doing is having a new 7,700 square foot building for vehicle servicing and detailing. And that dealership's located at 500 Orange Drive. Some other plan checks that we reviewed in District 2 include a Chevron gas station at the northeast corner of Leisureton Road and Elmira Road, as well as a remodel for McDonald's on Leisureton Road, and then some other residential patio covers. Looking on to District 3, there was a project that was approved. It was the Harbison Townhomes appeal. City Council voted 6-0 to deny an appeal and uphold the Planning Commission's decision from December 15th, 2020, last year, to approve the Harbison Townhomes project. Just to recap, that was 168 townhome style apartments, market rate, on an 8.86 acre site. So applicant is moving forward with constructing on that. Plan checks for District 3 look like a Pony Express Senior Apartments. That is a 60 unit apartment project over at 220 Aegean Way, as well as some sign permits. Mel's Diner drive-through, they're opening up their drive-through facility. They're located at 171 Nut Tree Parkway. Their response to the pandemic is to reactivate the drive-through. We also saw some some accessory dwelling units pop up over in District 3. District 4, we got a new conditional use permit application for Fairmont Square. What they're looking at doing over there is constructing a new 2,500 square foot drive-through restaurant building, and also a separate design review request to subdivide an existing 7,900 square foot tenant space. What they're looking at doing is splitting it up into a few other tenant spaces, and that's located over off of 521 Peabody Road. Some plan checks in there. There weren't a lot. An accessory dwelling unit and a swimming pool. District 5 was pretty quiet with no projects, but we did review quite a bit of accessory structure, plan reviews, some swimming pools, and some patio covers. Last but not least, in District 6, we did receive a new project. It is a design review request for the Seasons at Vannon Meadows house plans. They're looking at constructing 7 house plans on 212 lots in the villages. Those house plans consist of 2 single-story models and 5 two-story models, ranging in floor area from 1598 to 3116, and they're proposing American Cottage, Cali Ranch, and American Farmhouse architecture. A lot of the activity going on in District 6 for plan checks have to do with plot plans, the Cerrito plot plans, Parkside subdivision in the Vannon Meadows area, but we also reviewed some plans for swimming pools and patio covers. Home-based businesses are still active. We received 15 applications in January, and 10 of those applications were approved. And planning staff here helped serve 92 development-related inquiries. That's it for current planning. I'm here to answer any questions.
Do you have any questions for Albert?
Albert, this is Commissioner Beaumont. I like the district-to-district descriptions. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Looks like none. We'll move on to item number 10, Director's Report.
Okay, thank you. So City Council actions pertaining to Planning Commission items. Albert mentioned the City Council's decision on the Harbison Townhomes apartments on January 26th. So they upheld the Planning Commission's approval of that project. And as he noted, construction is underway. At that same meeting, the City Council did initiate the analysis and study of a zone change request to allow residential construction of a small project on Butcher Road. This is called the, the Village Townhomes, I believe. A small 22-unit residential project that's proposed for right on the curve on Butcher Road, going west off of Alamo Drive. So the council's action simply allows the applicant to submit the application to change the zoning and allow a small residential project that would eventually be coming to the Planning Commission for a recommendation to the City Council. And then at their last hearing on February 9, there were no Planning Commission actions that had come through the Planning Commission. There was a very good presentation on the city's economic recovery strategy and COVID recovery strategy. Very well worth reviewing the presentation. The city's Economic Development Services Department and the consultants that they have on board provided some very good analysis of the effects of the current situation, as well as the strategies that they've put together for council consideration in going forward. Then moving on to tentative schedule of future Planning Commission items. Your next meeting is on March 16. We have the potential for a few items. The Peabody Road apartment project that was continued from tonight's agenda is scheduled for that meeting. So that's a project at the corner of Cliffside and Peabody apartment project. There is the potential for another apartment project, the Allison Apartments. This is an affordable housing project. It is located near the Harbison Townhomes apartment site that you dealt with last month, or that the council dealt with last month, and adjacent to the city's transit center. So those two residential projects are moving forward and should be to the Planning Commission by March. And we should have a report for you on the code update, a status report. We do expect to go to the Airport Land Use Commission for their review of the proposed development code update in early March, and we would like to provide some status updates for the Planning Commission then at your March hearing to let you know what you can expect for consideration of the final draft of the code. So that is the outlook going forward from here.
Thank you, Fred. Any questions for Mr. Baderi? Then let's move on into item number 11, which is commissioner comments. Do any of the commissioners have closing comments they'd like to make? I do have one. I got a chance to watch the City Council consideration of the appeal on the Harbison Townhomes. And I know one of the items that came up was a question of a serial meeting. And I was a little disappointed the appellants never contacted me. I don't know about the others, but they never contacted me to ask questions that could have very clearly indicated that no serial meeting and no violation of the Brown Act occurred. And just to make it clear, I'm very aware of what the Brown Act requirements are regarding serial meetings and would absolutely never violate those. And if something happened where it was incidentally violated, I'd discuss it with the city attorney and probably disqualify myself from consideration of the item to make sure that I did stay within the Brown Act. But I was just slightly disappointed that nobody even came to ask how I conducted myself before that showed up in the appeal. So just wanted to make that clear. Any other commissioners have closing comments before we're done? See no hands come up. We are on to item number 12, which is the adjournment until our next meeting, which is March 16th. We are done. Good night, Vacaville.